good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. My name is Sean. I'm delighted you're joining us for today's ESPC community webinar. Today I'm joined by Benedict Bergman, MVP, who will cover Connection References Explained. We love hearing what guys have to say, so remember joining the conversation about today's webinar and more on X. Our handle is at ESPC_community and our hashtag is hashtag ESPC25. Tweet us, tag us, and tell us what you learned. Don't forget to check out our Learning Hub, which updates the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. You can access and view the Learning Hub by visiting our website, sharepointeurope.com, and clicking Content tab at the top. Join us for our next webinar, From Zero to Governance Hero, How I Built Power Platform Governance from Scratch with Lindsay Shelton, MVP. This will take place on Monday, the 9th of February at 4 p.m. CET. During Power Platform Week, we've got a special opportunity for you as part of the community experience. You can get €150 off tickets to EPPC 25 in Copenhagen. And this is off the current deal. Europe's leading Power Platform conference, packed with keynotes, workshops, and networking. This offer is only valid until 18th of February and applies to new ticket purchases only. So don't miss out. Scan the QR code and use code PPWEEK to secure your ticket today. As always, if you have any questions at any stage, feel free to type it in the chat box and Benedict will get it to it during the webinar. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass over to today's webinar presenter. Hello, Benedict. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello, thanks for having me. So let me share my screen. Here we are. So, welcome to my webinar about connection references. Thank you, Sean, for introducing me and all the other information, useful information about what you have lined up. So, we will nearly directly dive into it. First of all, I want to introduce myself a bit. So my name is Benedikt Bergman. I am the CEO of CMK in Germany, which we started as a branch from CMK in Sweden, where I lived the last 7 years or so. I'm coming from .NET development, then have added Angular and React, was thrown into Dynamics 365 on-prem installation or project and stuck to the platform, basically. And that's what I'm doing today. Power Platform and Dynamics 365, all the CE part, or what was called CE before, and everything that is with Azure Copilot, everything that somehow is connected to Power Platform. And I mostly do that as a solution architect and developer. So if you want to get in touch with me, here are my contact information, and you can also scan this QR code and get all that on the BioLink website. So feel free to add me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active, and write me a message if you have any questions, even after the session. So that's fine. So let's dive into what we are planning on today. So we will first of all look at what connection references are and what connections are. And also I will explain a bit what the difference is between those two, because that's something that usually creates the confusion. Then we will look into how we are supposed or how we can work with both. The third part is how to clean them up, because it's quite often that they get messed up by someone, and then the task is to clean the connection reference and connections up again. And the last thing is a bit of repetition, but I will have on one slide the tips and tricks I gathered throughout the last couple of years working with that. And we will hear some of them also during the session before, but it's like a repetition of those. So, and if you have any questions, please just write them in the chat, and Sean will give them to me during the presentation. So don't hold back. So let's see what we have. We have, on one hand, we have connection references. On the other hand, we have connections. They are very different from each other. Connection references map connections to flows and apps. they are environment scoped and solution aware. And what that means is that if you have like access to an environment or like the maker portal as a configurator or a system administrator, then you also can see the connection references, even if you're not the owner. So that's they are per environment, and they are solution aware, which means we can move them from one environment to the other. So we can add them to a solution and deploy them. They don't hold any actual information to connect to a third-party service. That is in the credentials. They contain credentials to be to a service, and that's any of the service we have in Power Platform, which comes with one of the connectors, like 1,500 connectors or so. But they are user scoped. They can be shared. That's why parentheses, we'll come to that. And they are not solution aware. So what does all that mean? They are owned by a person, and in the standard, only that person has access to this connection. So not even other users that are or might be system administrators can see another person's connection, unless it was shared with them. But, and there is the second point, not all connections can be shared. We have some connections like Dataverse until recently, and still in some of the environments and some of the regions can't be shared at all with users. It can only be shared with service principals, so app registrations. And there are other that we can share. So that's why it's in parentheses. It depends a bit on the type of the connector you're using and which which authentication type this connector is using. And in addition, Microsoft can activate or inactivate sharing for certain connectors as well. And then the last part is that they are not solution aware. So you can't deploy a connection from one environment to the other, which makes deployment and application lifecycle management harder. But it's understandable why that is done, because like the connection contains the credentials as mentioned, and we don't want to move them to another environment and by mistake connect with the wrong credentials. So that's why they are not solution aware. So we have one connection references, and then we have connections. And let's take a look at how that like is modeled in the data model, basically. So we have in the middle, we have connection references, and they connect flows or apps in some cases with connections. And they also have one custom or connector or custom connector. So in every connection reference, you can choose for which connector it is. That might be an out-of-the-box connector or a custom connector. And then you say, okay, for this connector, I want to use in this environment, I want to use this connection. And you can only choose connections you're having access to, obviously. But sometimes a connection reference uses a connection that you don't have access to. And that's where things get messy, I would say. So why did Microsoft do that? Like this complicated setup. The thing is that before we had connection references, maybe, I don't know, 3 years ago or so, we only had the connection between a flow and a connection. So a flow did use the connection directly. But since connections weren't solution aware, or they are not, and they never have been, we had to reconnect all the flows whenever we deployed from one environment to the other. So in any downstream environment. So for every deployment, we had to go into every flow and say, okay, now for this step, use this connection. For this one, use this connection, which was like a lot of work, especially if you have a lot of flows or very huge flows. And that's why Microsoft introduced connection references. If everything is set up correctly, which we also will take a look at, we can move them like flows and connection references to downstream environments without having like an outage or the need of manual intervention there in between or thereafter, basically. So we have ways of doing it correctly. if one knows how. And that's what we want to learn today. So, how should we work with connection references? In general, we should create them manually. That means we should not rely on the automatically generated connection references we get when we create new flows. And we will see that in the demo. Better is to, before you create a flow, think about which connectors you want to use and how your connection reference strategy looks like. And then create those you need or reuse those that already are there. That depends on what you want to achieve. We come to that a bit later. And in like the same area is set some naming standards and follow them when you create your connection references. I usually use like the connector and an area where it should be used. For example, a few years or a few months ago, I built an internal app to handle our vacation requests and so on. So there I have connection references which are called like dataverse dash uh, absence app, which is like the name of that app. So because it's in an environment where we have a lot of other apps as well, so I know that this connection reference should be used or is used for the absence app. But you could have another naming convention, naming standard, something that fits your project or your setup, but it should be the same for all your connection references so that everyone knows what to expect when they see all those connection references. Then the second or the third thing is we try to have only one connection reference per connector. So we don't want to have like a gazillion connection references for Dataverse, for example, or any other connector, because in most of the cases they use the same credentials. So then in production or any downstream environment, they would use the same connection. And if a connection reference or if several connection references use the same connection at the end, they could be one usually. It depends a bit from where they are coming. Like if you come together in production from different development environments, for example, then they have to be different, but still use the connector. But let's assume like an easy setup where we have one dev, one test, one production. There we want to minimize the amount of connection references we have, simply because that's easier to handle and to manage in the long run. So there are like that's the sub area sub point there. There might be different connection, and there's a typo, and it's expected that they are, and that might be if you have like for example different processes that use different users to change stuff in a target system, then they need different connection references. And back to my example I usually take, which is Dataverse, because that's what I'm usually working with. But so if you're using Dataverse, and let's say you have one process for your I don't know finance stuff and one process for sales, and you want to know which process has changed the contact, then you can have different connections in different connection references because those are different credentials you want to use. And then you need different connection references for that. So that's an exception to that, but we want to minimize the amount of connection references at least.
Benedict, there's a question in there, if that's okay. Or
Yeah,
two,
sure.
sorry. The first question is, how did you decide to use different COR for your internal absence app if there were other existing ones available in the ENB?
Yeah, so that's basically what I just talked about is we want to minimize the connection references and like the amount of connection reference we have. But if we have a use case where the user we want to connect to Dataverse in that case is different than the others, then we need another connection reference. And in that case, we have a special user which is just used for the absence app, so that we know that changes or stuff were made by the absence app, so where it's coming from and from which like integration, so to say, or which process. So that's why I needed different connection references for just that app, basically.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And just another question, if that's right. If you have a service account, isn't it a good practice to have the name of the account as part of the name? Like, for example, Dataverse underscore SA dash power dash HR dash user, and then use it in all the places you need it.
I mean, yes, that could be one of the naming standards. You could decide on that. That's the naming standard, of course. I usually at least indicate at the end whether I use like a named user or a service principal. So then it's like SPN or NU or something like that at the end. So I know that that should be a connection with the service principal. But you could also have the name of that, which one you're using, of course. But the thing is that you should have different ones for test and production. So, and it's the same connection reference. You're moving from dev to test to production. So, which one of those you take, like which name? So, yeah, it depends on the project. So you only have to decide on one naming standard and then go with it, so that all the connection references are named like in the same schema, so everyone is knows what to expect. But it could be a username or anything else, but it has to be consistent, basically. Yeah.
Perfect. There's another question in now if you want to take that one.
Yeah.
So often get created automatically, and we end up having more and more for the same connection. What do we do wrong, and how can we avoid it?
Yeah, we will come to that. That's one part of how we should work with that. So give me a few slides, then we can see it, and also how we can clean it up.
Perfect. That's all the questions so far. Thank you.
Good. So the fourth part I have here on this slide is use service accounts. And that's basically in test or in all downstream environments, I would suggest or recommend to use service accounts to own the connection. So if you go back to this one, they just need to own the connection reference. They don't need, no, sorry, they just need to own the connection. They don't need to be the user you're using in the connection to connect to an environment, and they will not be the owner of the connection reference or so. But the recommendation is to have service accounts owning the connection. And the reason for that is, as we have learned, we cannot share all connections with normal users. So the problem then is if your developer A is creating the connections in test and production and is on vacation or leaves the project, even worse, and then you like the developer B comes and say, oh, I have to activate that flow, or there's something wrong, the connection isn't connected any longer, or whatever it might be, there's some error. They can't like activate the flow again because they don't have access to the used connection. And the user A might not have the option to share it with B because it's a connection reference or a connection we can't share with the user. We only can share with service principals. To like come around that, and also connections are owned by user. When that user is deactivated because the user is like leaving the project, then there is a risk that all the connections this one is using or owning is deactivated and deleted as well after a period of time, I think 90 days or so, and which might affect your production environment. So if I as a developer go into production, create the connections, then we use them in our flows, and my account is deactivated after X amount of days, all production flows will stop working, which we don't want to have. So to get rid of those two dependencies on a user, we want to use a service account in test and production to own the connections. They don't need to own anything else. They don't need to be used in the connection to connect to an environment. So it's just the owner of the connection. And the nearly last thing here is use settings files for pipelines, and we will come to that on the next slide. And then there is now that's not needed any longer, but um, we want to use service principal names or app registrations in all the connections that we can. We can't in all of them, depends on the connector. But for example, in Dataverse we can, but we can't, for example, in Teams and SharePoint and Outlook. So if you want to use those, we have to create named users basically for those. So, but other than that, we want to use SPN as often as possible to get rid of dependency to named users basically. And before, like a few months or a few weeks ago, there was only a workaround how we could create an SPN connection, but it's gotten easier now. So we will take a look at that as well.
Benedict, there's another
Yeah,
question in there, if that's okay.
yeah.
Why do you need a different account in your connection reference from dev to test to production?
Like in the connection then. Usually, let's say you usually want to, as mentioned, use app registrations as often as possible, and we tend to have one app registration for pre-production that would be like test, maybe some staging or so, and then one for production. And the main reason is that we only want to give access to production to that app registration or that user, depending on which connector, so that we don't by mistake connect to the wrong environment with our integration. So they should only have access to what they really need. And that's why we want to have different users in like test and production to separate production out. In the best case, no developer has access to production either, other than when they use PIM to access that. But that would be like the next step, basically, in getting like production as scaled down as possible. It's basically the same as we don't want to give sysadmin rights to any of those users we are using for flows. They should be like they should have a security role which only gives them access to what they need, and that's the same for like different environments, different users. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
So I promised talking a bit about the settings file. So when and that's like a bit of an excursus to pipelines and ALM and stuff. But yeah, I think it's important. So when you use pipelines, which you should use to deploy stuff, you can use settings file. They will automatically set connection references and environment variables to the value you want them to have, basically. So when you then deploy to a downstream environment, in the import, you also present the setting file and say, for like this environment variable, which is like demo and var, for example, I want to have in that case, empty value. But yeah, you want to have some value here in test. And then for this connection references, which is a bad example of naming, we will see that. I want to have a certain connection ID connected. So with that, if we do that for all our connection references in our solution and we deploy, we can make sure that the flows that are connected to those will be like activated automatically when we deploy through the pipeline. We don't have to go into test or production and manually say, okay, we want to activate those. It is even so if we deploy one and then deactivate it, like turning it off, it still stays off because the pipeline knows the state. But with that, like I can push my stuff to downstream environment without me even touching any of those because I can handle it through the settings files. Yeah. And then, like coming back to the first question, basically, or one of the earlier questions, like connection reference getting created automatically, which is true, which we should try to avoid. Basically, I would say, because that leads to weird names of connection references, and more connection references that we want to use or want to have. And there's a reason why the platform is doing that. Usually, or until we know the reason or understand it, we usually tend to say it's random, but it's not. So let's dive into how that one is working and what the platform is doing there. So usually, if you change an existing flow, I can just work with it. I can create new steps. I can use the connection reference that were used before. I can switch to new ones I own, or I own the connection, or have access to the connection. So that's fine. Problems arise when we try to create new flows. And there is the thing that if I create a new flow and I want to use a connector, and I don't have access to, or there is no connection reference with the connection I have access to, it will create a new connection reference and create a new connection for me. And we want to avoid that. And the reason, or how we can come around that, is before we use a new connector in a flow, we check whether we have a connection reference where we have access to the connection. So, and how do we see that? So if you open the connection reference in the Maker portal, you can see those two screenshots here. So we have one on the left side. That's the one where we don't have access to the underlying connection. So it's called like shared common data service, like the internal name or so. Whereas on the right side, that's a connection where we have access to. So when it looks like here on the right side on that screenshot, and I create a new flow using Dataverse, it will use my Dataverse demo CRMK connection. Whereas when it looks like this on the left side, it will create a new connection reference, which we don't want to have. So that's basically the thing. Like, make sure that you have access to all the underlying connections in the connection references you want to use in the flow. If there aren't any connection references, create new ones before you create the flow. So is there any other questions? Otherwise, I will go into the demo.
People want to have the questions at the end. They just don't want to disrupt the momentum.
Yeah, okay.
So I think we'll leave it at the end. That's right.
Good. So then let's go over to one of my environments. There we are. So this one is now my user. You can see that over here. I'm logged in, and I also have another session with one of my test users over here. They are in the same environment. Both are my pipeline dev environment, as you can see here. And they both are in the solution conref demo, where you can see two things, the Cloudflow and one connection reference. So there, yeah, it's the same solution and the same, basically, components in my solution. So let's see. When I open the connection reference, and when it comes, then you can see that this one uses connection my user does not have access to. It's called something shared common data service and some ID. I don't have access to that. Whereas when I look into this one, it should show, yeah. So from the test user, you can see that's a connection the test user has access to. So what happens if I go in here as my user and open that flow? Edit. So it's not doing much that flow, it's just a demo flow. But if I go here and say Dataverse and then add a new row, let's say account. I think that one was account as well. Second account. That. And if you now switch to this one, it uses the demo Dataverse connection. And yeah, so I can still select the Dataverse connection reference demo as we also use here. So I can switch between those that I have access to. but I can use the one that we have in the solution. So let me save. Oh, count names. I presented it. I thought. Save it. So that's fine. And if you go back, there's no new connection references, reference whatsoever created. So I could change the flow, even though I didn't have access to the underlying connection. But what happens if I now try to create a new flow? So let's go automation, cloud flow automated. Oh, yeah, doesn't matter. Second demo flow. Let's see, Dataverse. Oh, there it was. Then row is added or modified. I create that one. And now you can see, like, in this environment, I have a different connection reference, which is a bit, you can clean it up, but I can't select the one we have in our solution any longer. So if you remember here, that one is called Dataverse conref demo. And that one I can't select, but I could just a minute ago. So if I go back to the Maker portal and go to solutions and select this one and try to edit this flow, edit, then I can select the connection reference we have in the solution. Here you are. There it is, Dataverse conref demo, but I can't in the new flow because I can't like access the underlying connection. So if I go in here as my user and change it to one of my connections, yes, and try the same thing, a new Power Automate flow, take an instant flow for now. Second demo flow, there it is, manually triggered, and I do a new step. So now I can choose either of those two again, because as you can see here, under the name of the connection reference, you can see the name of the connection. And if I don't have access, you don't see any name of like naming of the connection underneath that, this blue one. So now I can create a flow which is using the same connection reference. So third demo maybe. What is it? Sorry. Oh, wrong. I want to have this one like that. So I can save, and there shouldn't be any problems, and it should not create a new connection reference. Let's go back. It takes a second or so, but then the second flow should appear, and but there is no connection reference. So they both are using this one connection reference. We go here. We have both flows in there as a dependency. So that's what we want to have. But if I now go back to my test account, which is this one, and reload the page, I can see two flows after a while and one connection reference. If I open this one, it's the weird internal ID, even weirder than before, and I can't see that. And if I now, just to give you an example of how that would look like, create a new flow, and maybe third demo flow. Yes, manually create, and then okay. Oh yeah. Sorry, and then I add a new row, and now it pops up the sign in. So I can, it tries to create a new connection for me now, I can choose what I want to connect as OAuth, which would be my user basically, or a named user, service principal, or a certified, as a certification. But yeah, but I will just take mine for now. It will pop up the login screen where I can choose the account, and takes a while. And then it should have created a new connection reference for me.
There's a comment there, Benedict. Just
Yeah.
wouldn't we have two connection references now, one for each user?
Yes, exactly. And that's what we want to avoid. Yeah. I
Perfect.
just will show you what happens if you like don't change the connection, and then we will see how to clean it up later. But yes, what connection failed? Okay, that's interesting. Why is that? Looks like my test user isn't allowed to. So let's do it the other way around then. Interesting. Let's do it the other way around. I will select one of those, and then in here, create a new flow. So that's my user now again. And I will try to do the same thing. Sign in. There it works. Okay. So there is this one. This is giving a name. So if I save now and go back to the solution, there should be 3 flows and 2 connection references, even more, because it tried in between the other, like for the other user. You can see those are owned by the test user. So I tried to create new ones, but couldn't. So we delete those. So, but what you can see is that we have one connection reference, which is the one we want to use, and another one, which is also for Dataverse. And you could also see that it gets some weird naming, like the display name is Microsoft Dataverse, which is like the connector, and then conref demo, which is the solution we are in, and then some random string at the end. And also the schema name is basically the connection the schema name of the connector and the same random string at the end. So I wouldn't know where this one is used based on the naming at the moment. And the only thing I can change is the display name, but I can't change the schema name. And if you think back to the settings file, there we only have the schema name. So we want to have that one in like a name we can like address, so we know what to do basically. So that's basically what we can do, or how we should work with them in the normal way. So we have to make sure before we create a new flow that all the connection references we want to use have connections we have access to. And that needs to be done whenever you do a new flow for every developer, which can be a bit hideous from time, because you might need to do that several times a day, basically, because if several people are working on the same environment, like development environment, they can like steal their connection reference forth and back all the time. I know some customers that, to like get rid of that, also use a shared service account to develop flows, because then everyone uses the same user, and this user always has access to the connection, and you don't have to think about going forth and back in the connection reference. But whenever you want to create a new flow, make sure you first have all your connection references set up you want to have. And secondly, that they have a connection you have access to. Otherwise, it will randomly create new connection references for you. Or use others that are in the system but are not intended for that, like certain process, for example. So that's from the demo, from the first demo at least. And then I have some, how do we clean it up? So let's say we end up in a situation where we have lots and lots of different connection references and we want to clean them up. One of my customers, they became a customer then, but they called us and said, so we have here like 250 connection references, and of those 150 are 160 or so, or 250 connection references, and 160 of those are for Dataverse. And we use exactly one SPN to do everything in Dataverse. So what do we do? How have we ended up here, and how can we be better, and what do we do now? So we cleaned it up and ended up with like a handful of connection references overall for the different connectors. But how do you do that? First of all, you want to identify the incorrect connection reference. And with that, also identify which of the connection references is the correct one you want to use, or the correct ones, depending on like how your setup is. Then you want to identify where this incorrect connection reference is used. Then you want to change those occasions to the correct connection reference, and then you can delete the incorrect one, basically. And we will see that in a minute, but the thing is that if you clean up and want to do the third step, which is change to the correct reference, you have to do that in every step that the wrong connection reference is used. Like imagine a huge flow with, I don't know, hundreds of steps in worst case. You have to go through all of them and say, okay, for this step, I want to use connection reference A instead of B. And for the next step, I also want to use A instead of B. So it is a recommendation to get the connection references correct in the beginning of creating your flow to minimize extra work in the long run, basically. But sometimes that doesn't work, and it doesn't work for me either all the time, and I have to clean up after myself every now and then. But that happens, and let's see how we do that. So let's go back here. So now we are like in this situation where we have two connection references, we have three flows, and I don't know which of those are using which of those environment connection reference. Sorry, I mean we know because we just created it, but in a usual cleanup scenario you wouldn't. So first of all, we have to identify which of those is the incorrect one and which of those we want to use. So basically, this one is the incorrect one. We want to get rid of that because it was created automatically. It is using some weird naming for display name as well as, more important, the schema name. And we want to use this one, which has a slightly better name. And we only want to have one because we want to use the same connection at the end. So then we will go into this one and click on those three dots. We have advanced, and then we can show the dependencies of that. And you can see it's this one process that is using it, the third demo flow. So let's open the third demo flow. Then we go into edit. And then we can see, okay, this one is, as we know, very easy, but we just click on this one and we want to switch to the other one, which we can't because we don't have access. So let's fix that. Sorry. Let's select a connection in this connection reference, which we can access. And then we edit this one again. Nope, sorry. The third one there. So now we can go into here and switch to the one connection reference we want to use. And as mentioned, we would have to do that for all the steps that are using this connection reference. In that case, it's only one, but it might be more than one. So now we can save that. And we have to make sure one more thing, which, to be honest, I haven't found a pattern for, but sometimes happens. So if you go to the overview page of the flow, you can see here like this connection reference is used. And but if you go to now I have to see there it is, share, you can also see like underneath that you can see the embedded connection references. At the moment it's only one, it's the one we want to use, but there might be several ones that have been used before. So in that case you have to delete them as well from this page, otherwise it will not release the dependency. But as mentioned, I haven't found a pattern where it does and when it doesn't. So that I usually make sure that it's not like it's not in the list here. Let's see it from one of the other cloud flows. Maybe this one. Oh, we want to go there. And on share, it's also weird that it's under share, but that's how it is. Yeah, here you can see like it is using other connection references, which we basically don't want to use, so we have to remove them. Otherwise, it will not release the dependency to those.
Just comment there, after you change it to your credentials, how is this for the other users?
Then it's like the connection reference is then using my credentials. So they would have the same problem then after that. So if they want to use the same connection reference again, they have to switch back to their connection. So now I can see here, if I go to the dependencies again, there are no dependencies. So I can safely remove this one from the environment. And that's basically how you clean up connection references. You can, if you go in here and say dependencies, all three should be shown. So because they all are using this one. And yeah, basically what you have to do is you have to go through your connection reference every once in a while and clean them up like that. Better is to make sure that they don't be created like every now and then because you use it correctly. Otherwise, it is a bit of manual hassle.
Sorry, someone commented just saying, so what is best practice, question mark?
As mentioned, so let me just switch to this one. So basically, best practice is to make sure that the connection references you want to use in the flow you are creating is created, or there are connection references to those connectors, and that they have underlying connections you have access to, your user. Then you can create a flow. And you have to do that whenever you want to create a flow. It's fine to update flows, existing flows, but whenever you want to create a flow, it's important to make that make sure that that's the case. So the other tip and tricks I told you already, like naming and renaming your connection reference so they say something that where they're used and from whom or for which area. Create your connection references before you try to use them. Clean up your connection references every once in a while. Use as few connection references as possible. Create your connections before deploying, like in downstream environments. Use service principal connections wherever possible, and use service users for owning connections in downstream environments. Are there any questions left?
Yes, there's loads. So the next one is maybe a question for later. What's the best practice to update the SPN's secret for the connection?
You
brackets
have to create
used
a
for
new
solution
connection.
connections reference per environment.
So for the SPN connections, you have to create a new connection. Unfortunately, so we can't update them. We have to create a new connection and then assign that connection in the connection references where we want to use it, and then like a background process will update the flows to use the correct connection.
Perfect. So the next question is, in order to use pipelines, you need a managed environment, which means that all users also need premium licenses, correct?
If you want to use Power Platform pipelines, yes. But I usually use Azure DevOps pipelines, and then you don't need managed environments.
Perfect.
And
Sorry.
sorry, in the Power Platform pipelines, both of those pipelines use settings files, and but it's harder to edit the settings files in the Power Platform pipelines than it is in Azure DevOps. Yeah.
Perfect. Next question is, what is the best practice when working with multiple developers in the same solution?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a hassle, to be honest. As mentioned, it depends on the size of the team, and we usually make sure that we have the right connections in the connection references before we create flows, as mentioned, because we use our own users. But I have customers that decided on using shared development users so that they don't have to, yeah, think about that, to get rid of this randomly created connection references error, or whatever error it is not, but um, yeah, uncertainty, or yeah, weird thing. But I would say it's sharpen the your process and teach the developers that they have to make sure that connection references are set up correctly before they create flows.
Perfect. In a shared environment, would you use a single service principal for sharing connection references or a separate service principal for each solution?
The idea is to have as few solutions as possible. Microsoft's idea is to have one monolithic solution per environment. And if you want to have different solutions, you need to have different environments. If you follow that, that's basically, yeah, then you have the answer. But we don't do that all the time as well. But we try to have as few solutions as possible, and then we try to have, like, if we want or if we need to split it, then we have different connection references per solution usually.
Perfect. The next question is, when you go to connections and make desktop flow connection, it makes it automatically also a connection reference for it. Is there any way to make desktop flow connection without it making connection reference automatically? This does not happen like with Dataverse connection.
No, it does not. And I'm not an expert on RPA, to be honest. I only created one or so. So I can't say that, sorry.
Perfect. Next question is, how do you share access to connection reference for a user that does not have access?
It depends on the role they have, but you can share a connection reference as well. Let me switch back. I thought at least. No, they should have access because those are environment things. So if they have access to the solution, they should also have access to the connection reference. To be honest, they might not have to the flows because you can share flows, but you can't connection references. So they should have access, but they might not have access to the underlying connection, as far as I know.
Perfect. The next question is, what's the reason the user's email appear multiple times in the connection dropdown when selecting the connection in the connection
Yeah,
reference?
that is because if we go back to connections, I have potentially several connections with my user, both to like Dataverse, as you can see here, the first and last one. So in that case, if I select the connection, it would appear twice because it's different connections. One created 5 days ago and one created 70 minutes ago. But
Perfect.
both are using my user as the credentials to connect. So yeah.
Perfect. Next one is to summarize, we should create a connection reference for each type of connection for each user slash developer.
No. You want to create a connection reference for like how it should be in production. The developer doesn't have to do anything with that. Like in development, you can use whatever user you want to use. You don't need to use a service principal, even so you want to use that in production. But we want to minimize the amount of connection references that are in production. So we want to use like connection references are per connector, but we want to minimize that. So it depends on your setup, but I would say one connection reference per connector per area or per integration. It depends on which connections you want to use in production. Like if you only have one user that does everything in Dataverse, you should have one connection reference, no matter how many flows you have or how many developers. If you have like two integrations and therefore two users in production doing stuff, like changing stuff, you need two connection references.
Perfect. Next question is, how do we not come in the scope of throttling for users when using a service user account?
Sorry, again.
How do we not come in the scope of
Throttling.
throttling for users when using a brackets service
Yeah.
user account?
Because the service user I mentioned, they should not be used in the connection, so they won't connect to an environment. They are or to a target environment, but they or a data source, but they are just used to own the connection. They will not run the flows. They will not connect to Dataverse or so. They will just own the connection, and then in that connection, you can use a different user to actually connect to, for example, Dataverse. It should be a service principal or any other user, where we are back to the same throttling question. But yeah, like the service user shouldn't be the ones connecting to the target.
Perfect. And next question is how to create connections in advance before deployment and how this is taken care of in ALM process if user platform pipelines.
Yeah. So the first part of the question, you log into to your downstream environments, test the production, for example, go into connections and then create a new connection, and then select, for example, Dataverse, and then create a connection. And then if you're using Azure DevOps pipelines, for example, you can add this connection ID. And there was another question how to get the connection ID. You just open the connection, and then it's like up here, this part of the URL. That's the ID you have to copy. So between the connector name and details, that's the ID of the connection. That one has to go into the settings file. If you are using Azure DevOps pipelines, put that in the settings file. If you're using Power Platform pipelines, you like if you start a deployment, it should ask for the connections it should use in downstream environments, so you can choose it from there. And that's a bit of a problem I see with Power Platform pipelines as well, because if user A is doing a deployment now and user B is doing it in 2 weeks, they might not have access to each other's connections. So you change the connection or don't have any. But yeah, but this will also put this connection ID into a settings file, which is stored inside of the Power Platform pipelines entities and rows inside of Dataverse. So you can change it there as well.
Perfect. Next one is there an easy way to see the connection ID?
Yeah, that's the only way, like taking it from the URL, basically.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So is it so that you need to anyway create the connection references and connections manually always in the downstream environment before you deploy if you would like to use the settings JSON as you need the IDs for it? Is there
Um,
always a manual step even when using whichever pipeline?
you don't create the connection references in downstream environment. You only create the connections, but those needs to be created manually at the moment. Yes. So, but the thing is, you can do that when you develop the stuff. So the idea is, okay, I develop something, and one of my tasks is to make sure that I have the correct connections in the downstream environment because they don't harm if they are there, but the flow isn't. So I can go directly into test and production, create the connections, copy the ID, put it into my source control, like the settings file, and then I'm done with this. And I don't have to remember that, oh, when I deploy that to production in like 2, 3, 4 weeks or month, I have to remember to go in and create a connection. I can do that when I develop it, and then I'm done. And it's I can forget about it basically.
Perfect. Next question is when to share a connection.
Um, yeah. So basically, when we want to use settings files with Power Platform with Azure DevOps pipelines, we have to always share them with our service principal we are using in the pipeline. So and we can share all the connections with service principals, but we can't with users. So as you can see here, for example, this one is a Dataverse connection reference connection, sorry, and I can only search by service principal name. I can't search for anything else. And if I then go to a different one, I might be able to share it with user. No, that one as well not. Yeah, so in that case, sometimes we can share it with users and sometimes we can't. But you want to share it with your service principal you're using in the pipeline. And if you can share it with the user, you could share it with your development peers. So it's easier for all the setup. But most of them can't be shared, or most of the ones I usually use.
Perfect. Next question is would you consider a follow up session on Azure DevOps pipelines?
Uh, yeah, I have one. Yes, we can. Yes, hit me up.
Perfect. Just the last question there, Benedict, and then we'll kind of stop then. I don't know if someone already answered this, as there's an answer for it, but again, for the throttling, we have one user that runs, for example, certain API calls with different connection references, and after around 40k calls, we come into a throttling, even though we have more users. But on one user in brackets, the service user, which is a normal user in bracket, is capped. Should we use the option in brackets provided by run only user?
Yeah, I mean the throttling that we have two different throttlings, and this is like throttles also on the owner of the flow. So it depends on what your setup is, but you can share that burden if you use the provided by or if you share it by the requesting user. If you do the provide by run only user. Uh, you should then you select like a connection you're using, so it goes back to one user. So it depends on the setup, but you can write me a message on LinkedIn and we can take a look at it. Okay.
Perfect. So that's all the questions. So on behalf of the ESPC community, we'd like to extend a big thank you to you again, Benedict, for taking
Hmm?
time today to carry this webinar. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Perfect. So that's the end of today's webinar. You can find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/resource center. Thanks again, all of you, for joining us today, and I hope you join us again soon. Take care.
Thank you.